In this tutorial, we're going to give you a detailed overview of how you can create text and look at all of the options that we have available to edit text in the software. So let's just go to File, Close, and then we'll go and create a new file. So here we're working a single-sided job, 20 inches by 20 inches, half-inch thickness, then we could go ahead and press OK. So we're going to look at all the text creation and text editing tools that we have available to use in the software. So to access these tools you need to be in the Drawing tab, and under the Create Vectors section we have a row dedicated to text creation and text editing. So we're going to look at how we can draw text. We'll show you how you can draw text within a vector box. We'll show you how we can take text and edit the spacing and curve of any given text. We'll show you how you can convert text to curves, how you can take text and then wrap it along a curve, and then we'll also show you how we could take text and look at distorting it. So let's go and create some text. So over to this icon here, Draw Text, I'm going to click on that, and that's going to open up the Create Text form. Now as soon as you open this up, in our 2D view we'll be presented with a text box. The text box is currently in the center of my job, and this basically shows us the position of where our text will be entered. It outlines the size of the text that we're about to input, and this dot here represents our text alignment. We can see that's going to be in the center. So all I have to do here is come over to my text box, and I can simply begin by typing in some text. So here I'm just going to type in the word Vectric. And so the software will basically create that text based on the settings that we have in the Create Text form. Now not only can I type text, but I can copy text from another program and paste it into this text field. So I can right click in this box, and you can see I can use this option to paste any text into this text box. If I wanted to look at a larger text edit box, then I can simply press this button here, Larger Edit, and you'll see I'm displayed a much larger text box where I can just type text in here, and again I could simply right click to paste text that I may already have. Okay, so we'll just OK that. So now that you have text in your field, you can choose a font. We have two options. We have TrueType and we have single line font. Now TrueType font is any font that comes pre-installed with Windows, or fonts that we may have installed onto Windows. Now if you found a font that you like that isn't already installed on your system, then you can use the Windows help function to guide you through installing that font. Then we have single line fonts, and these are basically fonts that we've installed with the software package. So let's have a look at the TrueType font. So we can see currently selected is the Times New Roman font, and I can use this arrow here to access all of the fonts that we currently have on our system. For example, I could click on this one here and the text will automatically update. I can also use my down arrow key, and the software will automatically update my text according to which font is currently highlighted. So this is really useful for you to be able to see the text that you're actually wanting to put in with the various fonts that we have on the actual system. Now not only can I just use the arrow keys to scroll through, but I could also use the scroller on my mouse to scroll through each one of those fonts. And if you knew the particular name of the font that you wanted to use, you could simply come over to your fonts list and type in the first letter of the font. For example, if I wanted Arial, then I'd press A on the keyboard, and that's going to take me to all of the fonts that begin with the letter A, and I can simply go ahead and select the Arial font that I wanted. Now if you wanted to create text for engraving purposes, then you'd simply select the single line fonts, and then using the drop down option here you can see all of the different fonts that we've got available for single line. For example, I could select Helvetica, and you can see that we have a font here that just has a single line, and single line fonts are great for when you're using a conical engraving tool, as you can create a profile toolpath which goes down as deep as you specify along the vectors, producing a fast and efficient way for producing text for engraving purposes. So let's go back to the true type font. So once we've selected a font, we have further options to further edit our text. For instance, we could check this box to make our text bold. We can uncheck it to make it not bold. We can check this italic box to make the text italic, and then uncheck it just to put it back to its default regular text. Moving on down, we have text alignment. Now I mentioned earlier about this dot. This dot represents where our text is going to be aligned, and this is based on the anchor point, which in our case is in the center of our job at the moment, x10, y10. So we have three options. At the moment it's in the center of the text box. We can have it to the left, or we could have it to the right hand side. In our case I'm just going to go with the center there. And then the next option we have to alter our text is the text height. So you can see here we've got 2 inches in there, so it's telling us our text height is currently at 2 inches. Before we even created the text earlier, I did mention that this blue dotted box basically represents the height of the text as it's set in the form, so we get a good visual indicator of how high our text is going to be before we even type the text in. To edit the text, we could simply come into the text height box here and put in a new value if we wanted to, or we could simply click on our text. That will put that into transform mode, and then I could just pull on one of the handles to alter the height there. For example, if I take this handle up here in the corner, hold down shift, that's going to scale that in proportion like so, and then you'll see that the text height form will automatically update to how I transformed that text and made that smaller. So the last entry in the form is to specify the anchor point. Okay, so you can see since I've altered the text, we have altered the Y position of that text to 10.5486. If I wanted to change the anchor point, I could simply just highlight the value in there and input a new value simply by typing into these fields. Or if I wanted to manually move the text to a certain position in my job, I can simply select the text whilst it's in transform mode, and I could just move it to any position that I like. Okay, so I'm just going to put that back to 10 in X, 10 in Y. Now if I wanted to create separate text here, for example if I wanted to put something down here, I could simply click in the job, click again, and that will display our text box ready for us to enter in the text. We can see that it's going to be aligned in the center of that text box. We can see the height that this box is going to be, and then I could simply just go ahead and type anything that I wanted to in there. And so really the beauty of our Create Text tool is that I can click into any position, so I get a good visualization of where my text is going to go, how big it's going to be, and the text alignment according to the actual text box itself. Okay, so I'm just going to take this Vectric text here, press delete on the keyboard, I don't need that, and we're just going to have a look at this text. I'm happy with everything that we've got set up there, so I'm just going to close out of that text form. So as with any text that we create in the software using the Draw Text tool, the software will treat this entity as a text object, and this allows us to make further edits to the text by using any of the text manipulation tools. Now, until we're comfortable with the text that we've got, then we could look at converting the text object to standard vectors. So let's select that text, and we're going to go back into the Draw Text tool. We can see that the software has picked up the text from the text that we have selected, and so this enables me to make further edits where I could look at changing the text if I wanted to. If I wanted to add in a different line, I could do so just by simply pressing return to drop that down, and then I could simply start typing in more text like so. So you can see now we have Vectric and software. Wanted to, I could make that bold, and this really just demonstrates the usefulness of the software in that we can make edits to the text after we've originally created it, as it remembers it as a text object. So let's just close out this form. I'm going to take that text, I'm just going to delete it. Now the next thing that I'm going to show you is how we can draw text within the confines of a closed vector, and that is this option here. So draw text within a vector box. So in order for us to do this, we need to create a shape, a closed shape that we can then apply text inside of that closed vector. So let's go ahead and draw a rectangle. So here we're just going to go with a width of 16, a height of 6. We're going to make the X anchor point 10, Y 10, press create, close out, and there is our vector. Then we're going to select that vector, and we're going to come over to this option over here, draw text within a vector box. So now that we're in the form, all we have to do is enter some text, and the text that we enter in here will fit within the bounds of the rectangle that we created earlier. Now if we didn't apply a closed vector to auto lay out our text, then what it would do is it will take the bounds of our job space and use that for the bounding box dimensions. So we can see here it's currently at 16 by 6, which is what we set our rectangle to. Okay, so at this point we can simply go ahead and type in some text. So Vectric, return, software, return, and then for CNC. And very similar to the draw text form, we then choose a font if we wanted to. We can scroll through to see how the font looks in our 2D view. We could press a letter to get to a font that we want. For example, I'd like Tahoma in here. We can make that bold if we wanted to, make it italic. In this case, I'm going to go with bold. Specify the text alignment, so currently it's in the center of the bounds of our box. We could put it to the left, we could put it to the right hand side, we could put it back to the center there. Working our way down the form, we have bounding box dimensions. So as I mentioned earlier, that is the rectangle that we selected. We can alter this if we wanted to change it. For example, we can make the height of that 16, and you'll see the constraints of that box have changed. Okay, in this case I want to go back to 6 in there. So then we have the option to alter the margin size. So this is basically the space around our text within our bounding box. So currently set to normal, so we've got a nice gap at the top here and at the bottom. We have the option to apply no margins here, and you can see that that text is basically filling the whole height of this bounding box. It's really maximising the use of the space there. And then we could apply a wide margin, so it's just a wider margin space than what we had when it was set to normal. So we have two final options at the bottom of our form, and this is how we may want to stretch our text to better fit the bounds of the box. So we have the option to alter the vertical stretch, and we also have the option to alter the horizontal stretch. Now, in terms of our text, I'm quite okay with the actual vertical spacing of our text within that box. It's filling that just fine. But what we may want to do is make use of the horizontal space. You can see we have a lot of space to the left, and we have a lot of space to the right hand side. So let's have a look at how we could alter the horizontal stretch of our text. For example, we could look at stretch kerning. So this will just put spaces in between our characters just to stretch that out a little more to fit within our box. We also have the option to stretch the characters within the margins of the box. And this is a very useful way to constrain text to a box, and this would be very handy if you were making plaques or signs. So let's close out this form. I'm just going to drag my cursor over all of the vectors there so that they're all selected. I'm just going to press delete on the keyboard. So now we're going to look at this option here, Edit Text Spacing and Curve. This enables us to basically kern our text. So let's go ahead and create some text in order for us to demonstrate this tool. So we're going to go back into the Draw Text tool. Here I'm just simply going to type in Vectric, so I want that all in capitals, and then I'm going to return that to put that down a line, and then we're going to type in software. Okay, so the font that I'd like to use is just a basic Times New Roman, so I'm just going to select that one there, and then what we could do is go ahead, size that up a little bit more. Maybe I'll just manually do that by eye. Okay, so something like that, and I could simply close out there, and I'm going to take that text, press F9 on the keyboard just to center that. So the way that the software creates text is all down to the rules of the individual fonts. So you may find that the spacing between each one of these characters isn't always equal to each other, and the same also applies to the height of the text, and that's all down to the fonts themselves. But what we can do is use the Edit Text Spacing and Curve tool to edit the spacing of the text to our own liking. So we're going to click on this option here. Now, as I move my cursor over, we can see we are in a text edit mode, and if I go between characters of my text, you'll notice that my cursor has two arrows pointing at each other, and the idea here is if I click between two characters, it's going to bring those characters closer together. Now, the opposite of that, if I hold down Shift, you'll see there that the arrows are now pointing away from each other, so I can click and we can increase the spacing between the two characters. Now, if we wanted to make bigger increments with the spacing, all we'd have to do is hold down Control whilst we click. For example, bringing the V and the E closer together with Control held down, you can see we're doing that in much bigger increments. If we hold down Shift to send them away from each other, so we're increasing the spacing, along with Control held down, we can make big increments in terms of the spacing there. Okay, and so the idea is you'd work your way through each one of the spacing between the characters, increasing or decreasing as you wish. For example, the R and the I, if I hold down Shift, I'm just going to increase that spacing. I want to bring the C and the T closer together, the I and the C closer together, the E and the C closer together, S and the O closer together, O and the F closer together. And this feature is really useful and very handy if we're working with fonts that have serifs, for example, the F and the T. So if we want to bring those further apart, let's hold down Shift and we'll just bring those out, so we've got more spacing in between those characters. T and the W will make that further apart. W and the A we could bring together, A and R further apart, and then R and the E will bring together. Okay, so you can see just by tweaking with the space in between the characters, you're able to get the look that you are going for with the spacing of your characters within your text. Now, because we have two lines in our text box, if I bring my cursor between the two lines, you'll see I am now presented with a different cursor, and we have two arrows pointing at each other with the text line on the top and the line on the bottom. So this option enables me to bring the two lines closer together or further apart. Okay, so we're going to use the same keys that we did to bring the characters together or further apart. So here I'm just going to click, and that's going to bring the Vectric and the software text closer together. I hold down Shift. We can see now that the arrows are pointing away from each other, so when I click we are increasing the spacing. And again, if I wanted to make the spacing moves in bigger increments, then I could simply hold down Control at the same time. So bringing them together, hold down Control, you can see we're doing that in much bigger increments there. And then further apart, I'm going to hold down Shift to make the arrows oppose each other, and then we're going to hold down Control, and that's going to give us bigger spacing increments. And so we'd just increase and decrease the spacing until the text looks visually sound. Now, if our text was in single lines, we could look at editing the curvature of the text whilst in this edit text mode. So with our text currently selected, I'm just going to right click, and you'll see here we have the option to break text block into lines. So if I click on that, you can see that now the software treats that Vectric software text as two separate text entities. And so now that we are working with single line text, I have a green node at the top, I've got a transform handle in the middle, and then I have a green handle at the bottom. Okay, so this enables me to move my text around. And then the green handle at the top, you'll see that our cursor is displaying as a kind of arc that's going upwards, and if I click on that and pull that up, we can see that that is basically altering our curvature, and it's creating that text along this curve. And then if we bring that down again like so it's straight, we can take the bottom handle and do the opposite like so. Okay, so let's just take that back up and create that curvature there. And because we've altered the curving, it's obviously had an impact on our text spacing. And so here we can still, whilst we're in this mode, we can still edit the kerning of our text. So here I could bring the V and the E close together, the E and the C and the T, and it's still following along the curve that we basically pulled out earlier. So when we add curvature to our text, we now have access to some further nodes that we can use to edit the text a little bit more. So here we have a red handle and we have a blue handle. Now the red handle means that we can take that, move that text along the curve like so. And if I wanted to be a little bit more specific about the increments that we're moving the text around the curve, then what I could do is hold down Control and then take that red handle, and then I can move my mouse and it will move the text in increments of 15 degrees. And so the blue handle, if we select that and move that with our mouse, what we're able to do is basically increase or decrease the curve radius. Okay, so we can increase it like so, or we could look at decreasing it where we bring it closer together so that ultimately it becomes a full circle. Okay, so we're just going to decrease that, just bring that back up over there. So there you can see that we've demonstrated lots of different ways that we can edit the spacing of our text. So what happens now if we wanted to take that text and maybe edit the actual contents of the text? So if we go over to the Draw Text option, and it still recognises the actual Vectric text as a text entity. So here, if I wanted to add in further text, for example, if I wanted to put software in here, it's going to do so about the curvature that we created. Okay, so it's maintaining that radius, it's maintaining the text height that we've got in there, and then I could go ahead and delete that if I wanted to. Another option is if you wanted to change the font itself. So if I go to A and then we'll go and select Arial, you'll see that it still maintains that radius in place there. So let's close out here. Now sometimes you may want to alter just one individual letter within some text that you may have. For example, if I wanted to make the S in software much taller than the other characters, then what I'm going to have to do is look at converting this text into curves. Okay, so with that selected, we use this option here, and then the software will turn the text entity into a set of standard vectors. And this now means that I can make use of the many editing tools that we have available to standard vectors to edit this text. But it's important to remember that once we've converted our text to curves, the software no longer sees this as a text entity. For example, with those vectors selected, if I go into Draw Text, it's not going to recognize that as a text piece. So if we close out of there, we can now look at taking this S vector and look at using the standard edit objects tools to make this bigger. For example, we could just nudge that up like so, and this is something that we wouldn't have been able to have done using the standard text edit tools. We could also look at really transforming the shape of this S by going into the node edit mode. For example, we could pull this out, we could make that a smooth point like so, and just really change and transform the way that that S looks. Now if you wanted to go back to the word software being a text entity, then you'd simply have to just use the undo options until we got it back to a text state. So undo that, undo the changes we made to the S, and then we'll do an undo there, and if I select it, we're still in vector mode there, so just undo that, make that smaller, undo that again, and now we are able to select this as if it was a text entity. Now this message has popped up because we were in node edit mode, and it's telling us that we're unable to node edit text, so we know now that we are definitely in text mode. So I'm just going to press no here, put that back into normal selection mode, and if we select that, you can see it's now text, and if I go back into the Draw Text option, we can see that the software has picked up on the fact that we are now dealing with text. Now some of the functions in the software require us not to have overlapping vectors, and this is especially true when it comes to toolpathing. However, sometimes this cannot be helped, and this can be down to the type of font that we may be using. For example, our software text here, if we go into the Draw Text tool, we're going to change the font here. We're going to give that a brush script, so I'm just going to work my way down. Okay, so brush script MT, alter the text height, we'll make that 4 inches, press close, and then we're just going to use this option here to zoom active view to the selected vector. So we can see that the font that we've got here has tails going to and from the next character, and this is where the overlapping can become quite a bit of a problem. And there are things in the software that we can do to overcome this issue. So we're going to look at converting this text into curves so that we can work with individual vectors. So to do that, we're going to take this text and use this option here to convert that text into curves. Now, for some toolpaths, such as V-carving, it would require us to have one continuous closed vector to cut in between. So what we'd need to do is look at welding the vectors to create this continuous vector. So to do that, what we want to do is just select all of the outer profiles of our text. So to do that, first off, I'm just going to undraw the S, undraw all of the inner sections of the text there. So we've just got the outer vectors here. We're going to use the weld tool, and that will simply just weld all of those overlaps together. We can see we now have a continuous vector. Now, sometimes with script font, where characters overlap, we may be left with a few inconsistencies. For example, if we just zoom in to the A and the R, we can see where the two tails have been welded together, we have a rather unattractive join there. So here it would require us to do a little bit of manual editing. So with that vector selected, we could simply go over to Node Edit mode, and we could just delete that point, and also look at just highlighting that, pressing D on the keyboard to delete that. We could then turn this span into a Bezier span, where we can really just adjust the handles there just to make it look much smoother, maybe even smooth that point also. And then we could look at deleting this point and deleting that point, and you can see the result there is much more pleasing than what we had earlier. Okay, so if we use this option up here to zoom to the active view to our drawing limits, we're now going to look at wrapping text to a curve. So I'm going to go into selection mode and just box select these vectors here, and I'm just going to hit delete on the keyboard. So first off, we want to go ahead and create some text. So in here, we're just going to type in software, close out of there. Then we need to draw a curve that we'd like to wrap our text to. So we're going to use the draw curve option. I'm going to click to create my first point, and then I'm just going to create 4 points like so. Right click to come out, and you can see there I have a nice curve. I'm going to select the text, shift and select that curve, and then we're going to come over and look at how we can wrap the software text to that curve. So we have lots of options within the form to how we wrap our text to that curve. So we have options to alter the text size, we have options to alter the spacing, the position where it is about the curve, the alignment that our text sits about the curve, and then we have options at the bottom here to align the text to the curve or keep it vertical. Okay, now I like this option to align to the curve. At the moment we are currently keeping that vertical so that each character will remain in a vertical position about that curve. Now if we align that to the curve, you'll see that the characters will kind of tilt to the actual curve like we can see here. So looking at the top here, we've got options to alter the text size. So we can maintain the size of the text as it is, or we could look at scaling the text to fill the curve. So we can see now that our characters are just completely filling out on to the curve that we had selected. And then we could look at just decreasing that, and you can see that our text is just getting smaller. Okay, so if we just go back to maintain text size, then we could look at altering the text spacing. So this is where we can alter the spacing between the characters, so we have more spacing, less spacing. Then we move on to our text position. So it's quite self-explanatory here. It's currently set to above the curve, so the text is sitting above our curve. You could put it on the curve, so it's running the centre there, or we could have below the curve where it's sat underneath there. We have the option to put text on the other side. So if I click on that, that'll just move the text to the other side, or undraw that and put that above the curve with that undrawn. And then we could specify an offset distance if we wanted to, so we could put a little bit of a spacing between the text and the curve, for example 1/4 of an inch, make it more predominant. Let's try 3/4 of an inch, like so. Okay, so I'll just put 0 in there, and the software will automatically update that value to what we're seeing in the 2D view. Text alignment's currently in the middle. We could put all of our text over to the left hand side, we could put it all over to the right hand side. For now I'm just going to keep that to the middle. So we have lots of different options within our form to wrap our text to vectors. Now we can still further edit the spacing of our text. So for example, I could take the text, go back into edit text spacing and curve, and if I hold down shift we can space that out, and it's going to do that about the curve that we originally wrapped this text to. And again, I could bring characters close together and you'll see that it still follows the curvature of the actual vector. Right then, so if we go back into normal selection mode, now say if I wanted to add more text to what we currently have here. With that text selected, if we go into draw text, now the software still sees this as a text entity, so it's picked that up here in our text box. So say if I wanted to add more text to our box, what happens? So I'm going to add another software in there. You can see that as I'm adding more text, what's happening is the text is actually scaling to fit the curve that we originally wrapped the text to, and when we're creating more text, it's still doing it, wrapping itself along the curve that we originally wrapped the first software word to. Okay, so you can see that we can continuously add more, and it's going to maintain the curvature. If at this stage you decided you wanted to delete some of that text, it's going to keep it at the size that we've now shrunk it down to fit all of that text onto. So if you didn't want the size that you've got here and you wanted to revert back, then simply just press Ctrl+Z or use the undo option here to put it back to how it was before you added more text. Okay, so let's just shift and select that curve, hit delete on the keyboard, and now I'm going to show you how we can wrap text to a circle. So we're going to go and draw a circle. I'm going to snap to the center point, pull a circle out, and I'm just going to type in 10 and then followed by the letter D for diameter, and then you can see here that I have a circle that is 10 by 10. Right then, so let's close out there. So I've got my circle. Now I need some text to wrap around the circle. So back into draw text. So I can see I've got a very small text box there, so I'm just going to alter the height of our text. So we're going to make that 2 inches like so, and then we're just going to go and type in Vectric and then return, and then we're going to type in software like this, and then we can simply close out there. Okay, so I want the word Vectric to wrap along the top of the circle and software to wrap underneath below the circle. So in order for me to do this, I need to break my text into lines. So to do that, right click, use the option here to break text block into lines, and then we'll just take Vectric and just shift that over there for now. Software, we'll just drag that down to the bottom here. And so we're almost ready to wrap our text. Now when we wrap text to a circle or any given shape, there is no way for the software to determine where it is that you want the text to begin wrapping from. Now I want Vectric wrapping along the top of our circle, and I want the word software to wrap along the bottom. And the way that the software wraps text is all down to the start point of the vector that we're wrapping along. So if we take our circle and if we just go into node edit mode, you can see that my start point is here. Judging by this arrow, it's going to travel in an anti-clockwise motion. And so if I was to take my text, it would start it from this point, wrapping around here. Now, in order for me to get the results that I want to wrap Vectric to the top, software to the bottom. I need to break up our circle into two curves. So to do that, we're just going to take this node here, right click and say cut vector. Right click over here and say cut vector. So now we have two separate entities. Okay, so the start point for the bottom curve is going from left to right, like so, and then the start point for the top is going also from left to right. Now, for the purpose of this example, I'm going to make the top curve start point on the right hand side, and you'll see why shortly. So I'm going to right click on that node and say make start point. So now we can put our cursor into normal selection mode. Let's take the word software, shift and select that bottom curve. We're going to go back into wrapping text along a curve. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that my text aligns to the curve, okay? And at the moment I can currently see that we are above that curve, and I can see that there, so we want to make sure that that is below, like so. Okay, so that is the result I was after. I could put maybe a small offset in there, say of 1/4 of an inch, like so. And so that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to close out there, and if we go back into node edit, so you can see that the direction of this curve affects the actual direction of where our text is wrapped. Right, and so now we're going to look at wrapping the Vectric text to the top curve. Now remember, if we go into node edit mode, we've put the start point over on the right hand side this time. So I'm going to take the text, shift and select the actual curve, and then we're going to come over and wrap that text. So here we can see that this isn't really the result we were looking for. Ideally we want the word Vectric to come around this side. Now because our start point is here, everything is travelling in this direction, hence why our text is also going in this direction. It's currently set above the curve, and again in terms of where our start point is, this is above the curve, and then this side would be below the curve. So to alter this, we could simply look at using the text on the other side option, like so, and then again we could put in an offset in there of 1/4 of an inch, and then close out, and there we have our wrapped text along the actual circle. And so again, if I decided I wanted to change the text, I can go back into my Draw Text tool and make edits, and it's still going to follow the curvature that we've wrapped that text to. For example, if I wanted to make all these characters lowercase, I could simply do that, and you'll still see that it's maintaining that curve there. Okay, so let's just box select everything and delete those vectors. So now we're going to draw some more text. So here I'm just going to type in the word Vectric. We'll go with the height this time 3 inches, close out. Okay, so we have lots of options to really transform our text. Okay, so just the standard normal transformation of any vector entity, we can look at scaling it using any of these handles. So we can make it smaller, make it larger. We could look at stretching our text and then bringing that inwards like so. And even with this as it is, I can make further edits to the text by going back into the draw text box, and then I can continue to edit, and it's going to maintain all of those transformations that I originally made, and create further text like you can see here. Okay, so let's just close out there. Okay, and we'll take this, press F9 on the keyboard, and I can also look at using the rotation handles. Okay, so first I'm just going to shrink this down like so. Then I'm going to look at rotating it, and with that rotated, again I can still make edits, and it's going to maintain the rotation that we've just rotated this entity to. So with that selected, go back into draw text, and here we could go and type in software for CNC, and we can see that it's still maintaining that rotation, it's just extending that outwards for us. There's lots of different ways that we can really transform our text. So let's just undo all of those changes there and put it back to the text that we started with. So one final thing I'm going to show you is how we can really change text by using the Distort tool. Okay, so the Distort tool is over here. So we've got our text selected. We're going to go straight into Distort Selected Objects. Here we have 3 different options. We can apply a bounding box, which just basically takes the bounds of our object, and then we can look at distorting the actual bound box. We have a single curve, so we could take a curve that we could essentially wrap it to, but then look at distorting it along that curve. And then we have 2 curves, and we'll look at 2 curves later. So for now, let's take a look at the bounding box option. So here we just simply press apply, and you can see that we're now displayed the actual bounding box of our text entity. And this allows us to make transformations to the actual bounds of the box, and in turn it transforms the text within the box. And really this whole editing of our box is exactly the same as how we'd edit any ordinary vector using node edit mode. So you can see that we are displayed the nodes of our box, and so I can look at moving one of those nodes like so. Moving that up has stretched up the top node of our bounding box, and in turn it has distorted the text within that box according to what we've changed to the bounds of that box. I could also look at right clicking on one of the spans. Let's say we want to make that a Bezier span, so now I'm displayed these control handles, and I can pull that down. I can move that up, and you can see with every tweak and change to the actual box, we're actually transforming the text within that box also. So once you're happy with the distortion, we can simply close it down. Now you'll notice that we no longer have a solid outline of text, and the reason for this is that we've saved this object from a state of text into a state of distortion. So if I take this and go into our draw text tool, the software no longer recognizes this as a text entity. So we're going to have to close out here. But what we can do is make further edits to the text distortion by going back into the distort option here, and then using this option here to edit the envelope, where we can make further transformations to the bounds of our box. And so if you're happy with the distortion, then what you can do is use this option here to bake the distortion, and then this will allow us to access each individual character as an individual vector. So let's just take our text and we're going to delete that. Now we're going to input new text, so we're just going to type in Vectric in there and close out. And now I'm going to show you how we can distort text between two curves. Now in order to do this I need to have two curves in order for us to distort it to. So we're going to use the draw arc option. I'm just going to click over here, click somewhere over there, create a rather shallow curve, and then using the mirror option, just going to flip that about the job center, create a mirrored copy, flip vertically, close there, and then what we can do is take our text, go into the distort tool. I want to use the option here to go between two curves. Currently have a warning here saying we have an invalid selection, and that's because we haven't selected our curves. So shift and select the bottom curve, shift and select the top, go ahead, press apply, and we can see that it is distorting our Vectric text between the two curves that we've got selected. And again, we can further edit the actual bounds of our box, and you'll notice that as I'm editing these curves, we're not actually interfering with the original curves that we used to apply our text distortion to. Right then, so we're just going to go ahead and undo everything there. And now I'm going to show you how we can distort text between two varied curves. So let's just close out there. I'm going to go into select this curve, into N for node edit mode, and then here I'm just going to right click and change this arc into a Bezier curve. I'm going to insert several points like so, and then what we could do is we could just really transform the actual curve that we've got, so we've got this rather wavy shape. Right click to come out of node edit mode, click on this vector here, we're going to delete it, then I'm going to take this vector, we're going to go into the mirror mode, and then we're going to flip that about the job center, create a mirrored copy, we're going to flip that vertically, then I'm going to undraw, create mirrored copy, I'm going to flip that vector horizontally. So if we close out, we can now see we have two vectors, which are essentially two different curves. Okay, so let's go back into the Distort tool. We're going to take our text, shift and select the bottom curve, shift and select the top curve. Make sure we are doing this between two curves. We've got the check to say, yep, that's good to go. Press apply, and we can see we've got some interesting results there. So first off, most obvious is that you'll notice that our text is actually backwards. Now if we take a look at our bottom curve, we can see that the start point is here, travelling in this direction, and that's why the text is also doing the same thing. So what we need to do is we need to look at editing the start point on the bottom curve so that it's on the left hand side, so we should have the text going in the right direction. So let's just close out there. We're just going to press Ctrl Z just to undo that. Select our curve into node edit mode. We're going to right click on this node here. We're going to make that the start point, so now we're travelling in this direction. So back into normal selection mode, I can go into the Distort tool. We're going to select our text, shift and select the bottom. Now that we've changed the start point, shift and select the top between two curves, press apply, and that's exactly what I was expecting to see. So now that we've changed the start point going from left to right, our text is also doing the same thing. And what it's done is it's filled that text according to the two curves. And again, we could look at really altering our curves like so, and again you'll notice we're not actually interfering with the actual vectors that we used to create those curves. And so once you're happy with the distortion, we could go ahead and bake that, and we could close out, take our top curve, shift and select the bottom curve and delete that also. So that completes this guide on how to create and edit text in the software. Now there are many tutorials available that cover the tools that we've shown you in this tutorial in practical project examples.